All right, so today we're going to try and dive deep into something pretty significant and unusual, actually.
Yeah.
It's this whole case, with the federal court judge, and then you have the Trump administration, and this whole thing over an ICE deportation.
Right.
It's really interesting because it's not just about immigration, like you might initially think.
No.
It really gets into some really big questions about, how the legal system works,
Exactly.
how it's supposed to operate, and then individual rights.
Uh-huh.
Which I think is something that should concern anyone who's, trying to stay informed these days, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, forget the headlines.
Yeah.
What we're going to try and do in this deep dive is to really just dissect this whole situation.
Yeah.
The deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And to do that, I think, we want to try and understand the exact sequence of events, like what actually happened.
Right.
What were the legal arguments, from both sides? What was the judge thinking when they made the decision that they did?
Yeah.
Really the reasoning behind it.
Makes sense.
And to do that, we're looking at a transcript from Glenn Kirshner's YouTube channel.
Okay.
He did a whole segment focused on this case, and we're also going to be using an NPR news report so we can get the full picture.
Perfect. All right, so let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
What happened with Mr. Abrego Garcia?
So the main thing is that he was deported by ICE agents.
Okay.
But it's the details that are important.
Yeah.
He was taken into custody, he was put on a plane, and sent to El Salvador.
Okay.
And remember, this is a man who originally fled El Salvador
Right.
because of the threat of gang violence,
Mm-hmm.
right? He was seeking safety here.
It sounds like already this is not exactly standard procedure.
Well, if we look at that YouTube transcript, it gets even worse.
Okay.
It makes it very clear that he was seized and deported without a warrant
Wow.
and without any lawful or constitutional basis.
Okay, huge problem.
That's a big deal,
Right.
right? A warrant is essentially, legal permission
Right.
to take someone into custody. It's rooted in, in our constitutional rights.
Right, to protect people from unreasonable searches and seizures.
Exactly.
Okay, so no warrant, that's already a big deal.
Yeah.
But then there's also this whole thing about a pre-existing court order?
Oh, yeah.
What was going on there?
So this just makes things so much worse, basically. In 2019, an immigration judge had granted him protection,
Okay.
a court order specifically preventing him from being deported back to El Salvador.
Right.
And this was still in effect when they took him into custody and deported him.
So a court had already said he shouldn't be sent back.
Right.
And they did it anyway.
Yes. And as you can imagine, the federal judge was not happy.
Yeah, I bet. So what happened?
Judge Paula Sheen ordered the Trump administration to return Garcia to the United States pronto.
Pronto.
That's directly from the transcript.
Wow.
The NPR report actually gave a deadline 11:59 p.m. on Monday, April 7th.
Okay, so very specific and urgent.
Yes, she was serious.
And I remember something about the language she used, like
Oh,
she didn't mince words or something like that.
Not at all. She was very direct. She said, and I quote, "This was an illegal act."
Wow.
That was to Justice Department lawyers, right, in a federal court hearing.
Okay.
And this is all in that NPR report.
So illegal act, strong words. So what was your reasoning there? What was the legal basis for all of this?
So both the NPR report and the YouTube transcript really focus on the initial seizure.
Okay.
She basically said from the moment they took him into custody, it was wrong. It was unconstitutional
Okay.
because they didn't have a warrant, which we talked about as, that basic requirement.
Right.
In a lot of these situations, they didn't show probable cause,
Right.
like that there was a reason to believe a crime had been committed.
Okay.
So basically no legal paperwork, no justification
So the whole process was flawed.
from the beginning.
Okay. So obviously the government had to have some kind of explanation for this, right?
They did.
What was it?
So both sources say they admitted to an administrative error,
Okay.
but then they also claim that he's a member of MS-13. And they argued that once he was outside the U.S., the judge couldn't order him back.
Like she didn't have the authority.
Exactly, no jurisdiction.
That's a pretty big legal point.
It is. And, his lawyers weren't having it. They basically said all of that was nonsense.
Okay.
They said that Homeland Security needed to bring him back to fix their mistake,
Oh, okay.
like immediately. And there's a great quote from the lawyer, Simon Sandoval-Machenberg, in the YouTube transcript.
Yeah.
He said, "They're coming before this court and saying, we've tried nothing and we're all out of options."
Wow.
It just shows how frustrated they were.
Yeah.
The government wasn't taking responsibility.
It's hard to ignore the human side of all of this. Like, what was the impact on his family?
It was devastating.
Uh,
The wife, Jennifer Vasquez, had a press conference, and it was just heartbreaking.
yeah.
She talked about their 3 children, all U.S. citizens now, without their father.
Wow.
She talked about losing the love of my life,
Yeah.
and that their family was broken by ISIS's error.
And I'm assuming she meant ICE.
Almost certainly, given the context. Yeah.
Yeah.
But she really emphasized that he was a dedicated father and husband.
You're right. Completely contradicting that whole gang affiliation thing.
Exactly. And Judge Sheen really didn't buy that argument at all.
Okay.
She directly addressed the DOJ's claim about MS-13.
Yeah.
She said there was a total lack of evidence.
Oh, wow.
And she said, that's just chatter, in my view. I haven't been given any evidence.
Okay.
And she went on, in a court of law, it comes in the form of an indictment, a complaint, a criminal proceeding that then has robust process so we can assess facts.
Right. So prove it. Don't just say it.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Glenn Kirshner, the guy whose YouTube transcript we're using, he talked about some broader issues with this whole thing, like bigger picture stuff.
He did. And, we want to stay focused on the facts and the legal arguments here.
Of course, of course.
We're not endorsing any political views, but he did talk about the importance of government officials, like DOJ attorneys really upholding the law and the Constitution, representing the American people, within that framework.
Right, right. Which is exactly what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Understand the situation by looking at the information we have.
Exactly. Focus on the legal and procedural side of things.
Okay, so let's put it all together. What are the key things someone listening to this should take away?
Well, a federal judge ruled that deporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia was illegal.
Okay.
And this is not just a small mistake. This was unlawful. It lacked authorization, a warrant,
Right,
and it went against that existing court order.
right,
The government admitted to a mistake, but they tried to say it was okay because he was in a gang.
right,
But the judge said they had no evidence for that.
right.
And she ordered him back immediately. So, this is a big deal.
Yeah. So what does it mean when a judge has to use such strong language against the actions of, the executive branch?
I think it makes us think about that balance of power in our government.
Right.
What happens when legal processes and court orders are ignored? It shows how complicated immigration enforcement can be.
Right.
And how important due process is no matter what someone is accused of.
So regardless of what he was accused of,
Exactly.
the law and the Constitution still matter.
They do. It's not just theoretical. It has
Yeah.
real consequences.
It really does for people and their families.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case.
It is.
A lot to think about.
It really is. All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See ya.
Bye.